Good evening, everyone. I would like to call this evening's meeting to order. And I would say first that I will be chairing the meeting. The mayor is trying to make it here from Concord. He's caught there presently, and he hopes to attend. To the extent that he is unable to hear presentations, he will certainly follow up with commissioners as needed, and will watch the presentation on DVD or on TV. I would like to welcome everyone here this evening, members of both the police and fire commissions, along with the various staff members, chiefs, and all and sundry who are attending. This evening we have two presentations. They are going to be that of the Police Commission and Police Chief first, and then the Fire Commission and Fire Chief second. Before we get into that presentation, we'd like to have a few brief remarks of introduction from the City Manager, John Bohenko.
Thank you, Your Honor. The first item, just to bring everybody up to date for those that are at home watching this, as you are aware, on April 18th, we held a public hearing on the proposed 2008 budget, and there were presentations at that time from the police, the fire, the schools, and municipal departments. Tonight is our first in a series of work sessions. Tonight's work sessions, as the Assistant Mayor said, will be with the Police Department and Fire Department. We will have a work session on Thursday evening with the School Department, then a work session with all municipal departments on May 9th, and that's next Wednesday, May 9th. And then finally, there will be a reopening of the public hearing on May 14th after City Council's deliberated and discussed the budgets in more details with all the departments. And then on May 15th, there will be a final work session City Council will have in discussing how they may or may not want to adjust the budget. And then on May 22nd, there will be a special City Council meeting on May 22nd to discuss and adopt the City Council budget. And if you recall, we compressed the schedule to try to accommodate the school department who are trying to get contract renewals for their teachers. So we wanted to try to get the budget adopted by May 22nd. One other item that I'd like to bring to the City Council's attention and also to the departments this evening is we did get a final number for our medical insurance. As you recall, our medical insurance, we had projected that on a 10-year basis, our medical insurance would be increasing on an average of 11.7% over the 10 years. We found out today that the local government center has set our rates, and our rate actually for fiscal year 08 will increase by less than 1%, 0.7%. So what that does with the 10-year average, it brings it down to 10.5%. Obviously, we're not going to go all the way to the full savings because that would defeat the purpose of a stabilization fund. So what that really does is it reduces the overall budget, or can reduce the overall budget, by $100,000. And it really, in the municipal side, it is, let's see, I think it's $19,000 for the municipal side approximately. Police will be about $14,700, fire about $8,000, and schools about $57,800. What we do with that is Judy Belanger, the finance director, will work with the individual departments and make those adjustments in their budgets. But overall, you can count on a $100,000 reduction from what I presented to the City Council, which is about 3 cents on the rate. So from that, it's a good start. So, Your Honor.
Okay, at this time, we would welcome the Police Commission and/or the Chief of Police or whoever you're going to have present this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Assistant Mayor. Good evening to you, to the City Councilors, City Manager, and staff. Thank you for the opportunity for this work session so that we can go into more detail on the police budget than we did at the initial public hearing. Chairman Kelly has asked me to extend to you his apologies for his absence tonight. He has a conflict and was unable to attend. However, in a way, I'm kind of happy that he's not here because it gives me the opportunity to talk about a department of which I am extremely proud. It's a department that is facing some unique challenges, specifically challenges that are brought about by a vibrant city in which we live and in which we work. It's a unique type of growth. It's not necessarily residential growth. It's visitors it's guests, it's workers, and these people, though not residents, still demand public safety. They need to be policed, as do our residents. They need to be protected and they need to be safe. And that's the responsibility of this department, and it's a responsibility that we fully accept. The men and women of Portsmouth Police Department are an exceptional group of people. They are not just police in this community. They are participants in this community. They are coaches, they're mentors, they're volunteers, and they care deeply about this community. They coach track, lacrosse, basketball, football, at all levels, and as such serve as role models for our youth. However, they are also extremely highly trained professionals that deal with issues that we tend to shy away from. They make split-second decisions that have profound consequences. And it's the responsibility of this commission to provide these officers and civilian personnel with the resources that they need to do their jobs for this community. We as a commission, in conjunction with the departmental administration, have developed this budget that we're presenting to you tonight. We are cognizant of the fiscal constraints of the city and its residents. However, we're also cognizant of the resources necessary to provide the level of public safety that this community expects and deserves. So we are presenting to you tonight a budget that reflects a balance between departmental needs and the ability of the community to support the level of service that is expected. So I would like now to turn it over to Chief Mike Magnet for a more detailed look at the department and the budget.
Thank you, Commissioner.
I look forward to your questions and input.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you very much. Is this going to pick up my voice? Do we know?
We'll have a request out into the booth. Do we hear the chief on the microphone at the podium?
Talk. Test it out. Clock, test. 1, 2, 3. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Test. Closer to your mouth.
Is it on?
Well, I'm not the one that chooses.
It's going to be like American Idol here.
We have confidence in you, Chief.
Test.
There you go.
We have contact. Go ahead.
Thanks. City Council, City Manager, thank you for this opportunity to talk about your police department and also to discuss our budgetary needs. Fiscal year 06-07 has been a busy one for the department, but we continue to make strides in areas that directly affect quality of life, including traffic enforcement, motorcycle noise, chronic homeless. We've gained ground in the fight against drug and alcohol abuse among our teens, DWI enforcement, illegal narcotics, child pornography, online solicitation, and all forms of cybercrime. We've made strides in officer safety, technology deployment, and working with neighborhoods. And this is part and parcel of the community policing philosophy that we embrace at the Portsmouth Police Department. We are proactive rather than reactive. And I know that I've put this slide in front of you before, but I think it's important to review the goals of policing. I'm not going to go over each and every one of them, but I do want to mention what I feel is perhaps a new goal that is being imposed upon us, and that is your police department is asked to be prepared for a large-scale event such as terrorism, a pandemic flu, and a natural disaster such as Hurricane Katrina. We're being told by the federal government that we need to be able to hold down the fort. A little bit about traffic safety. Everybody knows that the police department regularly patrols the streets of the city. What people may not realize is that we respond to citizens' concerns about traffic issues through the use of directed patrols. Directed patrols is a term for the time that officers spend focusing on a specific problem or a specific issue rather than regular patrol activity. It's a collaborative effort between the officer, their supervisor, and at times the neighborhood that is affected as well. By way of an example, I think I'd like to mention Jake breaks. It continues to be a source of complaints from citizens in our community. Last year, as you recall, you enacted an ordinance to deal with this issue. Rather than just go out and do enforcement, the police department worked with DPW to install signage in affected areas. We personally spoke with 37 different trucking companies, and the officers went out and handed out 200 letters to affected businesses. And then we followed up the education with enforcement, and we continue to do so. Another area I think that's important is homeless. In the fall, just before winter, Captain Furlan, Captain Champlin, and Deputy DeSessor and 20-plus social service agencies and property owners met to discuss ways to deal with the chronic homeless population that resides in outdoor camps on city and private property. The officers went out on their beats and identified where these camps were. Most, if all of these sites, were contaminated by garbage, by human waste, by used syringes. They posed a threat to the public, and in some cases, they posed a threat to children who were playing in the area. A series of meetings resulted in an initiative whereby social service agencies worked with police to visit these camps. They succeeded in moving the residents into shelters, or at least at a minimum to provide the opportunity for them to access services. Captain Furlan engaged property owners to go out and clean up the sites, and Captain Furlan and Deputy DeSessor actually went out with them and helped to clean up these sites. Through the winter, we monitored the sites, and we continue to monitor them. Again, talking about traffic, one of our major responsibilities is to respond to accidents. Accidents happen. We can't prevent them entirely, but we can work to reduce their numbers in the future and the consequences. The police department is working closely with the city's traffic engineer and members of the Traffic and Safety Committee to analyze accident data to see what can be done to identify problem intersections and hazardous roads. I'd like to personally address one great example of working together, and that's the intersection of South and Sagamore. At one time, this was an especially dangerous intersection. And I'd like to thank the manager and thank the council, Councilor Smith and Traffic and Safety for the work that they did to clean up this intersection. I'd also like to mention that in 2006, the state of New Hampshire officially recognized the Portsmouth Police Department for its enforcement efforts. It's been 5 years since an alcohol-related motor vehicle fatality in Portsmouth occurred. And unfortunately, this slide is no longer up to date as of today, as we had a motor vehicle fatality occur out at Pease Air Force Base. From January through December of 2006, reported crime was up 1%. However, in the category of serious crimes, we're seeing what we feel is an alarming increase, and it concerns us. Felonies are up 43% over last year. This increase is reflective of the national trend regarding serious crimes. Dealing with serious crime is time and resource intensive, and it translates into more work for our officers in responding and more complicated investigations for our detectives as well. I do want to note that we've made a number of arrests in these areas. Robberies, we've arrested 18 individuals. Sexual assaults and rapes, we've arrested 16. And burglaries, we've arrested 14 individuals. Last year, as you recall, I walked you through a patrol case. This year, I'd like to walk you through a case that occurred that our BIS division had to work. I want to point out that this is not an overly complicated case in that the suspect was quickly identified and arrested. In fairness to the defendant and to assure that he receives a fair trial, I'm not going to address certain details or aspects of this case. A high burden has been placed on detectives to exhaustively investigate crimes. We see the CSI effect now as grand jurors ask detailed questions about forensic evidence, such as DNA. On a quiet Monday in March, Officer Sheldon was patrolling downtown when he was approached by a 16-year-old female who said that she had been sexually assaulted. Officer Sheldon notified his supervisor and at the same time arranged to transport the victim to the Portsmouth Hospital emergency room for examination. Typically in such cases, our patrol officers will do a preliminary investigation before detectives are called to ensure that all witnesses, victims, suspects are identified and all perishable evidence is collected. Detectives were notified. Detective Kim Sir, who was familiar with this victim through her duties as the middle school resource officer, responded as well. Patrol officers in the meantime determined where the assault had taken place and responded to the house in order to secure the scene and identify the suspect. The suspect was positively identified and brought to the station for an initial interview. Every detective receives training in the basics: investigating, conducting interviews, crime scene analysis, processing evidence. But beyond these basics, we have a number of individuals with specialized training. Because contrary to what you see on TV, we can't just pick up the phone and call in CSI to come in and help. We do it all ourselves. In this case particularly, we're dealing with a juvenile victim, and that required specialized training and certainly a special sense of sensitivity. The suspect had to be identified and interviewed. The crime scene, which occurred in a rooming house, had to be secured and analyzed. In this case, we had evidence in several interior rooms and outside of the building, and before any crime scene work could occur, a search warrant had to be applied for and obtained. These types of investigation, unlike TV, do not get solved in 60 minutes. It can be days, it can be weeks, months before the investigation is fully completed. A briefing was held the next day with detective staff, the prosecutor was briefed, and evidence continued to be collected and cataloged. Interviews were conducted, including a comprehensive interview with the victim at the Child Advocacy Center. And through our investigative efforts, by the end of the week, additional charges were brought forward. What I'd like to do is just real quickly on the slide is point out the prison time that this individual has served. You can see that from 1983 into 2003, this person was incarcerated. The suspect in this case is a repeat violent offender, which made this case even more urgent. Nearly 2 weeks after the assault was reported, detectives continued to process evidence and ready the case for the county attorney's office. This case, as you recall, had a ripple effect in the neighborhood where it occurred, causing a sense of heightened fear in the people living in the immediate area. We addressed some of these concerns by having officers do additional patrols in the area and by meeting with concerned residents to not only address their fears, but to devise a set of strategies to ensure that they and their children felt safe where they live. This case overlapped many areas that we specialize in. Detective Sir had familiarity with the victim through her duties as a school resource officer, a program we think that proved its worth in this case. Our youth advocate also got involved because she was working with the victim and the victim's family. I often talk about the challenges and dangers of underage drinking, and in this case, the victim was offered alcohol by an adult. You've heard me talk about the importance of maintaining the sex offender registry in the past, and here we were able to quickly obtain past history data. Again, this was not an overly complicated case, but I wanted to give you a better understanding of how even an uncomplicated case can span a wide range of time. By the time this case was concluded, I estimate that approximately 20% of the department was involved in one way or another. The case I just reviewed was one of many sexual assaults that our detectives investigated in 2006. As I mentioned earlier, we've seen a dramatic increase in sex crimes, including a 122% increase in the number of rapes, 143% increase in sexual assaults, and a 110% increase in online child solicitations. You're looking at the face of some of the people we arrested in 2006 for these crimes. And as you can see, they blend right in with the everyday crowd. There's no one description of what a sex offender looks like. It should be noted that each one of these arrestees has been arrested, indicted, or has an indictment pending. I have to say I'm especially proud of the work that your police department did regarding this case. We talk a lot about proactive policing and prevention in law enforcement, but it's hard for us to corroborate our prevention efforts and validate them. But here is a case that we truly believe that we prevented a child from being victimized by a sexual predator. In this case, we received a letter indicating that the suspect, who had a record of sexual assaults, was spending time with an underage boy, but we didn't know who that boy was. Our high school resource officer, working with another detective, worked with school counselors and staff, and they were able to identify a potential victim, and they were able to intervene. I'd like to read a letter that we received from the Massachusetts Sex Offender Registry Board, who brought this case to our attention initially. Dear Chief Magnet, I'd like to take this opportunity to bring to your attention the outstanding efforts of one of the police officers in your department, Detective Kristen Rogers-Bernier, relative to the investigation and arrest of a sex offender from our jurisdiction. I forwarded to your department information regarding a level 3 high-risk sex offender from Massachusetts who had been identified as acting in a suspicious manner with an adolescent in your jurisdiction. Armed with scant details, Detective Bernier was able to locate potential victims and charge the suspect with 3 felony counts of interfering with parental custody. She is an excellent reflection on both you and your department. Respectfully, Richard T. Mercurio, the Director of Registration, Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Sex Offender Registry Board. Now I'd like to highlight some of the cases that we've worked over the years, the last year. And yes, it's not beyond me to put up puppies and babies if it's going to help me get my way. So another stolen puppy case, counterfeiting case, an arrest for burglaries, vehicle break-ins, which has caused us much aggravation throughout the year. Again, sex offenders, more thefts from vehicles, another sexual assault, public housing arrests. We spend a lot of time in public housing these days because of the increased fear of crime. Most recently, the baby formula theft you may have read about, and we believe heroin was the driving force behind these thefts because heroin was found along with drug paraphernalia. In the past, I've gone into detail about training and community service. I'm not going to do that now, but I think it's important that I touch upon training. We place a high priority on officer training, which clearly paid off recently when 2 individuals in separate instances threatened suicide by cop. And I'm especially proud of the officers' restraint and their professionalism in these cases. And we continue to place a high value on community service as well. You may recall a community spaghetti dinner organized by members of the police department at the Margison Apartments because of an increased level of fear. And I want to point out that this was a bottom-up effort. It came from the officers who were directly patrolling the Margisons. So the money. Every department in the city faces the same challenges in preparing their budgets. Rising insurance costs, contractual obligations, retirement rate increases, and utility costs all impact the bottom line. This year, we're submitting a budget request of $8.37 million, and it represents what we believe is necessary to police the city and keep it safe. It retains the current staffing levels, but will provide us with some of the dollars to address needs in communications, fleet repair, training, equipment, and overtime as well. This slide shows a breakdown of the budget. You can see that 88% of our budget is for salary and benefits to put police officers on the street. The remaining 12% is split, with 6% allocated to overtime and 6% for operating expenses. This top chart shows reported felonies. These cases, which involve more serious crime, usually require more thorough investigation and are significantly on the rise, as I stated. The bottom graph shows the number of overtime hours working just case investigations. As you can see, it correlates with crime trends. Since overtime has been an issue in the past, I want to talk a little bit about overtime. We struggle with overtime on a daily basis. This is an example of the monthly analysis we use to track our overtime costs. Several years ago, the police department developed a very detailed reporting structure to manage a very complicated but necessary component of the police department's budget. The matrix overtime audit commissioned by the council during the last budget season revealed many of the proactive management practices the police department already utilizes to control overtime. As you can see from the lower right-hand corner of the slide, we track overtime as compared to the prior year, and this is an example from Family Services. It tells us that back in August, our overtime for the current fiscal year began to track higher than last fiscal year. Further analysis of the reasons behind the increase revealed that the number of cases that we were investigating, including child abuse cases, had increased this year over last year. There's a high degree of accountability in place when it comes to utilizing overtime. But it's important to keep in mind that we are a 24/7 operation. We staff to meet the demands in terms of calls for service, but police work for the most part is unpredictable in terms of timing of crime, its severity, or the public reaction. They all place different demands on us. In addition, the matrix audit revealed that the police department was within the median range of comparative agencies surveyed for fiscal year 05. An updated survey of these comparative agencies has been completed for this presentation. As the chart above shows, the police department's actual overtime as a percentage of salary expenditures for fiscal year 06 once again fell within the median range. And the final slide in this context of the matrix review deals with the many factors that influence overtime hours from year to year. It's a mistake to view overtime as a static figure. Crime levels, the types of crime, staffing levels, injuries, training requirements are just a few of the variables that have to be taken into consideration. In addition, the cost of each overtime hour is impacted by things like cost of living increases, percentage of staff on step increases, the rank of the employee. Managing overtime is not an exact science. However, we continue to aggressively manage and monitor overtime and its effects on our budget. For example, this year, serious crime is up. Our dispatch center has encountered a perfect storm. We've experienced a baby boom in the department. We've had several work and non-work related staff injuries. and we started the fiscal year down $25,000 in our overtime allocation. These are all contributing factors to a large overage projected for this fiscal year that we are struggling to manage. However, it provides a prime example of what we struggle with each fiscal year and our goal to control overtime. We've been modest and realistic in our budget submittal to you this year. We're requesting a 6.86% increase over last year. To translate that into dollars, it's $537,096. And of this amount, $478,000 is committed to salary, benefit, and utility increases outside of our control. The remaining $59,000 represents a small increase to deal with what I feel are important future needs of the police department, and includes $23,426 in overtime, $35,760 in our other operating lines to cover such items as annual increases in our service maintenance agreements, repair costs, radio batteries, officer equipment, training, and general supplies. We continue to pursue external funding to offset the cost of law enforcement services to the taxpayer. And as I stated, we constantly review our overtime and our operational expenditures for savings, and will continue to do so. And as you may recall, that last year we put forward a department-wide reorganization that reduced ranking officers by 2 and patrol officers by 1. In the interest of brevity, I'm not going to go into all of the details we face as a department in terms of future challenges. But I do want to mention the chronic homeless, the addicted and mentally ill continue to place a burden on the officers out there on the street. We've become the caretakers of last resort for this population. Alcohol-related crime and disorder continues to be a problem for us. It's the citywide growth. Some other challenges. We've been notified by the U.S. Attorney's Office that as things stand right now, our street sweeper funds will cease at the end of September. This is the money that we utilize to fund our Special Investigations Unit. Although there's a slim hope that this money may continue, we cannot plan on that happening. We're currently scouring federal and state grant sources for replacement funds for this program. If these funds do expire and we're unable to secure a new grant source, we'll be faced with cutting the Special Investigative Unit, or the Commission may come forward and ask for a supplemental budget. The Commission felt that it was important that you know this at this time. Another area of concern is our dispatch center. If you recall, the Council commissioned a PSCOM study in 2001. 99% of the recommendations outlined in that study have been implemented, with the exception of the staffing level. The study recommended that the dispatch center increase staffing from 10 dispatches to 12. However, this recommendation has never been fulfilled. Partial funding for an 11th dispatcher was approved in the fiscal year budget 03. However, before we could even hire for this position, we realized that funding for the upcoming fiscal year was not a reality. This was during the era of the statewide property tax, when Portsmouth sent out over $11 million to other communities. We have attempted on several occasions to include an 11th dispatcher in our budget requests, but each year the funding has not been approved. The fiscal year 08 request before you does not include an 11th dispatcher position. But again, the Commission feels it's important for the Council to know that this year in dispatch we have been significantly short-staffed. Injury, sickness, and family medical leave have left us teetering on the brink of a staffing crisis. Forced overtime in the center is at its highest that it's ever been. The hiring of an 11th dispatcher needs to be an important priority of the Council, as it affects public safety as well as officer and fire officer safety as well. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief, for your fine presentation. At this point in time, if no one else from the Police Department or the Commission seeks to offer further information, we would open it up to questions from the Council. Come one, come all. Councilor Dwyer.
I can ask this question. You mentioned tonight, and I've heard you say on a number of occasions, that the increased number of establishments of different types that sell alcohol in the community is really responsible for an awful lot of the increase in various ways. And I'm wondering what your ideas are or what you have seen other communities do that maybe are not necessarily police or police-only issues, but may involve actions by other departments as well to address that, because I know what a concern that's been for the department, and obviously it's increasing our costs.
Thank you. That's a good question, and I believe we've been very proactive as a police department in this area. Actually, Portsmouth Police Department and what we've done in this area has been pointed out as being a leader by different national organizations. We try to work very hard to have a partnership, first of all, with alcohol serving establishments. The deputy spends a lot of time meeting with the proprietors and the managers and talking with them about their responsibilities. He has a great working relationship with the state liquor enforcement. They come in as well. Every time we encounter an individual who is impaired and we have reason to believe that they are coming from a Portsmouth establishment, we send a letter to that establishment telling them that we have encountered this individual. We have reason to believe that they have been drinking in your establishment. We have reason to believe that they may have been overserved. We can't prove this, but as an owner and as a manager, you should know about this practice. On occasion, in the beginning of the summertime, in the spring, we'll bring them all into the council chambers, and we'll make a presentation to them. We'll bring in the liquor commission as well, liquor enforcement, and we'll just go back and forth and answer questions. For the most part, we've had a very effective, I think, we've had a very good working relationship. Like anything else, there are 20% of the establishments that cause a problem, and these are the ones that don't want to work in a cooperative fashion. And at that point, it gets a little more difficult. One of the things we could look at, I think, is perhaps some way to have a mechanism where the city has a little more, I don't know, power or authority in the granting of liquor licenses and the renewing of liquor licenses, so that when we have problem establishments, we have a voice at the state level. I don't know if the deputy wants to chime in.
One of the new ideas that we were also trying to put in place was to have one of our sergeants act as a liaison with the downtown business owners. And that process was in place and was going when we had to move him to another assignment. But I want to get back on track with that so that we can be a voice in these meetings and we can work proactively with the bar owners to offset these issues before they start.
Thank you. I saw Councilor Hines and Councilor Reynolds after that, I believe. Councilor Hines.
Well, I'd just like to say that we can understand, and I know we know, that the population of this city is not representative of the numbers of people that the police department has to deal with every day. There's probably that actual population triples. However, there are issues that, because of the port, the water port, and the airport, and with the world situation the way it is, we do have to be extremely careful that we have enough coverage in that area. The only concern that I have is that group of people in the city who have been here long enough so they are now retired and on retirement pay, that have no way to deal with an increase in taxes except to reduce their quality of life. And that is the issue that I think we have to keep in mind when we look at the budget and try harder to find some way to at least reduce part of that increase. Try to do it in those areas that do not reduce quality of services that the police department has to deal with in the areas that I just stated.
Councilor Hines, thank you. If there is no comment with respect to Councilor Hines' comment, I'll recognize Councilor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor. My question would be sort of a follow-on to Councilor Dwyer's, which I'm trying to think of how to phrase this, and it could partially be a question to the. I'm not sure whether the answer will come from the police department or perhaps the budget director or finance director, city manager. Do you feel that whatever financial benefits are realized, I guess I just have to say direct financial benefits, say from the revenue associated with more liquor serving establishments in the city, is balanced by or what's the balance between, let's say, the direct financial benefit to the city as opposed to the state, perhaps, for licensing liquor establishments versus the additional resource demands that are borne at the local level by this concentration of alcohol serving establishments?
I'm not sure that the city realizes any revenue other than the taxes property taxes that they receive.
Right.
Interestingly enough, the city of Portland, Maine, in their Old Port area, instituted what they called a bar stool tax, where they taxed the liquor serving establishments in the Old Port area for increased police coverage. I don't think we, as a city, have the ability to do that because of the whole home rule or lack of home rule issue.
Right, and I think, just speaking on that matter, the chief is correct. Because we are not a home rule state, we don't have the ability to levy a tax other than a property tax. And also as it relates to fees have to be equivalent to services rendered, and that might be something we could probably look at. But those have been challenged and pretty much been identified as a kind of a hidden tax through fees. So we'd have to watch that. But there is things we could do. We could work with our state legislators and talk about some of those issues. And next year's legislative initiatives, we could talk about those. I would have to say that you can probably speak to that on a number of issues, not only alcohol. Because of the over-reliance on property tax, that's what happens. We rely on the property tax for 66% of all taxes raised in this state. So until you start dealing with that issue, I think you're going to be always up against that. So, but I think we'll probably be working with the legislative delegation next year to talk about that. Meals and rooms taxes, we've been, we get a percentage of that back, but not as much as we put in, obviously. So there's some issues that we can work on.
Thank you.
Councilor Reynolds, there would be no increase unless there was a new building built. Mm-hmm. If you convert an existing building and put a liquor license in there, there's no increase.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the city manager very adeptly read into the substance of my question, which is this:
how can we
do have this very distorted, over-reliant on one vehicle system in this state, which ends up, communities like Portsmouth and perhaps other places for other reasons are sort of cash cows for the state in certain revenue streams, and yet the burden of dealing with the consequences of those aspects of the economy falls disproportionately on the local community taxpayers, property taxes, and it's unfortunate. So,
and I don't think we should lose sight of the fact of what the chief said. 80% of the establishments are,
Right.
fine dining and
it's not.
those types of places where make our city a wonderful place to be. There are those 20% that cause us issues. So think we have to be careful and weigh that a little bit as we talk about it.
Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. I don't want to be seen as demonizing the fine restaurants and entertainment venues that we have, of which I am a big fan, so.
And I think all in all, Portsmouth is a very, very safe city. I mean, we have more liquor licenses than any other city or town per capita in the state. And as Councilor Hines said, a lot of people come to Portsmouth to visit and recreate and ultimately go home at the end of the day having a great experience. So.
Right. It's just a function of certain volume.
Councilor Hines.
It's occurred to me that I've wanted to speak about Crossroads House, which appeared to be a problem with the police department. But I've got to tell you, there are a few things that people probably don't know or don't think about, and one of them is the amount of money that our welfare department saves because of Crossroads House. I don't know what the exact amount is, but it's measurable. They provide mostly charitable services, donations from other towns, donations from people, and they also reduce on this city street a condition that really would disrupt the beauty of the city in terms of tourism. And that is that if we didn't have these people housed somewhere off the street, they'd be sleeping in hallways, in the back of cars, and probably panhandling on the street at times. So those issues pretty much have been wiped out because there is food and there is shelter in this city for those who need it. And all of that is provided. You know, there's a state law, I do believe is still in effect, that if a person is stranded in this city overnight or for whatever, the city is obligated to provide food and shelter. And that is where I referred to the amount of savings that the city really gets from having a place like Crossroads House for a shelter.
Thank you, Councilor Hines. Appreciate your heartfelt remarks. Are there any other questions for the police? I would, Councilor Whitehouse.
This has a bearing on this present budget, and I'd like to just address the overtime of this budget, the one we're in today.
If you have a question, please ask it.
Chief, you sent us a memo in reference to possibly overtime overexpending that account. In looking at the financial statement as of December 31st, percentage of that line item is about 75%, and already 98% has been spent. Now, that is of December 31st. What is it as of April 31st?
Probably not healthy.
I can imagine that.
I don't know off the top of my head. It was, first of all, it was the commission who sent you that letter, as I recall. They did that because I advised them that I had concerns about finishing the fiscal year that we're in now in the black. It's directly related to crime and the investigation of crime. And there's very little I can do to control spending overtime to investigate the types of crimes that we talked about this evening. But I can tell you that we are doing everything that we can to make sure that we finish this fiscal year in the black, and I feel pretty good about that. However, you know, I can't, this type of stuff, I can't predict it, and it means we have to hold officers over. This afternoon, motor vehicle fatality out at Pease. I incur more overtime. I can't predict that sort of stuff, but I can tell you again that my direction, the directive I got from my boss is to do whatever I can to finish this fiscal year in the black.
There is a possibility of moving some from one line item to another line item within the budget.
That's correct. And right now, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the bottom line at this point for the police department.
Thank you, Council Whitehouse. Council Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Last year, going through the budget process, you did a complete reorganization and moving some people around in an attempt to save some monies. And it seemed to have worked. And I'm wondering if that's a practice you have looked at for this year. Is there any adjustments that you're looking at making to see, or you're going to stay with the same track?
Good question. The reorganization last year is a long-term plan. That will not be finalized probably for 3 to 4 years out from this point. It goes from reducing the number of captains from 6 to 3, and a number of other changes in the organization. So when we put that plan in place last year, that was a comprehensive plan to bring us forward. We have certainly revisited that from time to time as we're trying to implement that, because we have to implement it sort of on the run as positions open up, people leave, or we have vacancies. So we look at it, on a monthly basis or whatever. I can't see us making any other changes in staffing in terms of a reorganization that would save money. I think that the plan that we put in place that we worked with our ranking officers, I think is a good plan, and it's just going to take some time to carry it out.
Additional questions, Councilor. I saw Councilor Dwyer, but I saw Councilor Penelakis as well, and Councilor Dwyer after that, as she has not yet spoken. Councilor Penelakis.
I just was curious about the crime analyst. Is that something that we really, really need, or what benefit would that be for us?
That's part of the reorganization, as you recall. We reduced our ranking officer staff by 2. We went from 19 to 17. One of their responsibilities, one of the areas that they're responsible for, is reviewing coding of reports, and we wanted to shift that responsibility away from them to a civilian staff. Along with that, we've been working very hard with our software vendor to try to capture the kind of information that the council has asked from us in the past in terms of committed time, detectives' time, and this is a position that will work directly with the vendor and hopefully make the kind of improvements in the software program, but also will work with the officers as well. We'll have what crime analysts have done in other cities, and what we're going to have in Portsmouth is a daily crime bulletin, and a weekly crime bulletin, and a monthly crime bulletin. And we're going to try to identify what's called hotspots in the city, where we have problems such as theft from cars, been causing us a lot of heartburn throughout this fiscal year, to try to identify trends, to see if they're occurring at a certain time, in a certain neighborhood, a certain day. So I think yes, I think it will be a valuable position. I think it's going to prove its worth in the long run.
Thank you. I'd just like to say that I think the taxpayers are getting a damn good bang for their buck with the police department. I had to use them last Sunday afternoon, and there was 5 incidents going on at the time that I called. And that's supposed to be a quiet afternoon for everyone. I mean,
it's been extremely busy. I don't know what's going on, but it's been very, very busy at the police department.
Thank you, Councilor Penelakis. Councilor Dwyer.
Maybe my question is about the busyness. Just a comment that a number of people have made to me, and just get your reaction to it. I think, the respect for the serious work that the police department does is this year, I think, has been really seen in the community. But I think there's also the observation of, with community policing and with the philosophy, are our citizens asking sometimes things of the police that really are not police matters? And I refer to things like, I saw a snake in my yard, I left my lunch on the porch, a guy made a remark to me while I was walking down the street. And I think one of the things is citizens observe those because, of course, they appear in the paper.
Yes.
And especially with the cost for dispatch and whatever. I mean, how do you guys feel about that? Because I know the community policing philosophy, but it feels like there's a continuum there where are our citizens taking time away from things as the other things that you're doing are increasing dramatically?
Well, fortunately, because we have the combined police and fire dispatch, we're able to push a lot of those calls over to the fire department.
That's a relief.
But I noticed you take credit for them.
They're up next, Chief. I warn you, they're up next. Okay,
Let me,
go ahead, please.
I've been a police officer here for 28 years. We've been getting those types of calls for 28 years. We're always going to respond. You have an elderly person living in their home, and they have a bird in their chimney or a bat in their house at 2 o'clock in the morning. There's nobody else that's going to go and help them but us. And we've been doing it forever, and we will continue to do it. Where you see the conflict with community policing is when I think people get the perception that community policing is soft on crime, and it's not. Community policing is not soft on crime. You know, the philosophy is that we will work with the neighborhood, we'll work with the community to try to get to the root issues, the root problems of crime and disorder. But at the end of the night, we're still going to arrest people for committing crime. That type of issue, call for service, will always be a priority over the bat in the attic, or I've lost my wallet, or I can't find my cell phone, which we probably get 10 of them a day. That type of thing will always be the priority in what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Councilor Grasso.
Yes, thank you. I just want to follow up on what Councilor Panalakis said. I think that the city gets very, very high value for the money we spend on the police budget. And I think that it's all of us as councilors now need to be concerned about the rapid increase coming up in fuel costs. As any of you have driven by the fuel stations today, have realized that every 2 or 3 days it goes up several cents. And I think that is going to make their budget even tighter. So I don't know. And again, for all throughout the city, all the budget departments, it's something that I think that for the council to keep in mind, that when we cut things, you know, they're going to need that gas thing. They're going to need certain things, and the prices are not going down, even though their rates are different than ours. They're still going to go up.
Thank you, Councilor Grasso. Seeing no other hands, I will just say, on behalf of the community, on behalf of the City Council, we appreciate your hard work, your excellent presentation, and the great job you do in our community. And we will deliberate with intensity about what it is we're asking from you. And we do appreciate your time. I would ask, too, to my fellow councilors that we will have a meeting May 15th, at which time we would likely go through the process of rolling up our sleeves further, talking about a potential straw vote if need be, and do the work we did in a similar fashion that we did last year. So if you have additional questions, we would certainly invite the police, the commissioners, and all and sundry to be present at that meeting so that they can answer questions if we have them at that time. We can take a 2-minute recess if someone be kind enough to make a motion, and then we'll see the fire. Thank you.
TV timeout?
The TV timeout is over. We are on the air. At this point in time, I would like to welcome the Fire Department, the Fire Commission, and all and sundry who are going to present for you. And at this time, whoever's going to speak, please be recognized, and let's go.
I'd just like to make an opening statement that it's a privilege to meet with you all tonight and the public. We don't have a lot new for you. We bare bones things and put in the essentials that we need, and we fight right to the end to try to get those. The things that we don't need, we beg a little bit and go from there. But I would like to make a statement about having been on this commission, I don't know, a long time. When I first got on, I really didn't like my job. And there was a lot of bickering, complaining, whining, moaning, groaning, budget deficit, shortfalls, things falling down, things going sideways. And now my job is really quite easy. We have a fine group of firefighters, a fine group of officers. We have the right people in the right places doing the right things at the right time. And it makes, I know, Paul's job, my job, and Mike's job a lot easier to have those people here. We're lucky to have them. The city of Portsmouth is lucky to have them also. I would like to let the chief give his presentation now.
Thank you, Commissioner Gainster. Chief Leclerc.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Assistant Mayor, members of the City Council. I'd like to talk a little bit about the Fire Department's fiscal year 08 budget. I have a brief presentation for you. This slide will just give you an indication of what our activity is. One of the most frequently asked questions we get from the council is, what is your makeup of fire and EMS calls? And it's just about 50-50. Just to give you an idea of fire activity side of the house for 2006 stats. Most of it are rescue calls, and that's motor vehicle accidents, technical rescue, industrial accidents, that type of thing. The next highest percentage is good intent calls. We go out and try to solve the issue. It's pretty much the other category. And large chunk for severe weather in our area. Total fire calls are just over 2,400. We can't give you an idea of every call that we go to, but give you an idea of EMS patient conditions for 2006. Majority of them, over 50%, were potentially unstable. Serious injuries. The next highest percentage being non-classified or non-transports. These are going out, the guys going out, solving issues for the public, making those contacts with the public. Our dispositions, where all these patients ended up. You see 78% of them were transported to our local hospital, and 14% were not transported. We do go out and check people out. If they don't want to be transported, or if they're not, their injuries don't warrant transport, they have the option of signing off. But the majority of our patient contacts do get transported to our local hospitals. Our ambulance revenues for fiscal year 06 was $452,000, and projected to eclipse that for fiscal year 07, and just an ambulance billing. Fire prevention inspection statistics. Several active places of assembly that require annual inspections. 86 completed so far. That's about what we get to annually because we do not have the manpower to get there. You see the other additional occupancies that require annual inspections, such as apartment buildings and fuel storage depots and churches that also require us to be there every year, but we're not able to get that workload done. So far, we've logged 164 plans reviewed, 14 environmental hazard assessments, which is somebody buys a piece of property in town, commercial piece of property, and they want a hazard assessment to find out if there was any fuel tanks buried, that type of thing. Lots of consultations, over 2,500 customer inquiries of prevention codes and interpretations, 51 investigations of all types, many public education classes, that's both in the schools, nursing homes, elderly housing facilities, and about 230 inspections. Goals for fiscal year 08, enhance community fire prevention services. Obviously with the workload that we have, we're understaffed in that area. We need to maintain our minimum shift staffing of 13 during the day and 14 at night, utilizing 4 shifts of 14 personnel. We're in the process of constructing a new fire station in District 2, and to continue our infrastructure improvements, as Commissioner Gamester said not too long ago. Prior to my time, infrastructure was in a sad shape, and through the support of the Commission, the City Council, with the great capital improvement plan, we've been able to improve on that substantially. Needs to maintain appropriate staffing levels that covers the city's 3 coverage districts. And I've said this before, but if you look at a map of Portsmouth, it's a triangle, and if you split it into 3 equal parts, we're very fortunate to have a fire station in the center of each one of them. We've been asked about our loss. Our fire loss and life loss, it's all directly proportional to how many people that you have and how quickly they can get to the scene. Just to give you an idea of that, we recently was a young man, I'll say young man, he's my age, young man exercising at one of our local health facilities and collapsed of a heart attack. He was pulseless and breathless, and with quick response and the great work of the Portsmouth Fire Department personnel, he is alive and well and home today, and we're very proud of our responses and being able to do things like that. In addition, we want to establish a lead role in a regional response to special hazards and maritime operations. As you know, the new fireboat, which was 100% funded by Homeland Security grants, is online now, and we're working with our local partners in the Coast Guard and Marine Patrol and DES to get together a maritime incident response training team that can handle these issues. We need to maintain a modern apparatus fleet, including our tactical heavy rescue unit, which is in the capital improvement plan for 2008. And continue our efforts toward international accredited agency status. The CFO decertification that I recently got was the first step in that process. We are an accredited, registered agency status, working toward accreditation now. In the budget, our budget request is a 6.234% increase over fiscal year 2007. That includes our minimum staffing of 13 during the day and 14 at night. As I said, there are 14 personnel assigned to shift. If somebody's out at night, it gets filled. If somebody's out during the day, we go down to 13. Our increases, in a large part, are due to contractual obligations. Over 5% of our 6% increase is contractual obligations, step increases, health insurance, retirement, fuel costs, those type of things. In addition to that, we have emergency management responsibilities. We're trying to deal with all of our normal responsibilities, responding to fires and rescues and hazmat situations in the city, dealing with emergency management issues, terrorism threats, and all the stuff, the new assignments that we have that we proudly undertake. And I'd just like to thank the staff, the excellent staff of the Portsmouth Fire Department, for the work they do all throughout the year. And I am open to questions.
Thank you very much, Chief Leclerc. Councilors, questions for the chief? I know you're not shy. I know you're thinking. Councilor Whitehouse.
I'll start it off, yes. Chief, this is in reference to what I'm hearing on the street. Now that the defibrillators are getting down there in price, where the average homeowner can afford it, and they actually talk to you in reference to instructions, can you give me a sense of how important it is probably for a homeowner to have one of these in the house and use it sensibly? Are they at that stage now where they are not very, they're not dangerous to use?
If you don't mind, Counsel, I'll hand that over to Assistant Chief Paramedic Steve Achilles.
Thanks. You're not going to see at this point automated external defibrillators in people's houses. Some people that have significant medical problems that are pre-identified by their physician might have that option, but it's not like a fire extinguisher where you're going to go to Walmart and get one. They are getting easier, and actually what we're doing in the community is, along with City Hall and the city departments, we're putting them in key locations within the city, and a lot of businesses are putting them in because they have a little more control over them. And that seems to be working as far as a public health benefit. But as far as having them in residence as a regular thing. I don't see that occurring right now. But there are the isolated cases where people have been prescribed them because of a significant medical problem.
Do you foresee the time that they will be so simple to use?
In my 20 years doing this, they've become very simple as opposed to what they were before. So I could see in the near future that if they get simpler and the cost comes down, that people could basically have them like fire extinguishers.
Thank you. Councilor Dwyer.
I'm not sure who this is a question for, but one of the things I noticed is in the ambulance, the billable collection rate, the decrease in the percentage of that's almost, just that little difference is about half of the whole increase you're asking for. If you know what I'm saying, that going down from like 68% to 52%, that percent of that almost $1 million base is almost half of the increase that you're asking for total. What are the factors that reduce that collection percentage? Because that seems like that would go a long way toward. I mean, is that just luck of the draw? Is that good? Is that going to fluctuate really wildly year by year?
I don't normally pass off questions, but both of these topics are under the control of Assistant Chief Achilles, and I know he has worked with Judy Belanger on a billing policy, but I know you can expand on that.
Council, regarding that, I'll answer it in two phases because there's a balance. There is what we can charge that's allowable, and that can be somewhat complicated because we have a rate. And Medicare will usually have their own rate and pay 80% of that. So right off the bat, there's a lot of our population that won't pay the full amount.
Got it. Okay.
So what you'll see is commitments, how much we build out based on our services, and some of that built-in loss is that negotiated number or managed number. So because of our population in the older population uses our services more, so that's part of it. So we won't always see the whole amount. The other component is we don't have an aggressive billing policy, and that's something that the city as a whole and the city councils previous have understood, that we will not aggressively ask people that can't pay.
I understand that.
What we are doing, though, and we've worked with the city, is we've identified that there is a portion of people that get a bill that have the ability to pay that choose not to. So we're trying to come up with a reasonable plan that would accommodate people that are in fixed incomes that don't have the ability, and then ask those people that have the ability to pay to be responsible for it. Just because we raise our rates doesn't mean, like, we can make it $1,000 a call, but that's not going to always make us more money. I think if we're more attentive on having a reasonable collection policy and abatement policy, along with, as you saw the chief put up, that the good part is we're transporting 77% of those that we actually go out on. And a number of those are billable patients. With the dynamics, I don't see us, I'm hoping that there's some benefit when we implement this collection abatement policy. I don't think we'll ever see 80% collection rate, but I would love to see it closer to 70% for a community as demographics like us.
Well, especially with the base number increasing as much as it has, of obviously the calls that you're going out on.
The one thing I think that has to be, we have to look back a little bit in history, and I think Commissioner Gamester would probably be aware of this. Years ago, we used to charge a lower rate so that at the Medicare rate. So what consequently was happening is that we were losing substantial sums of money from all the insurance billing that we were doing. So, for example, we charged the Medicare rate where there might have been a higher usual and customary rate available. So that's why we went to that. And I believe at the time, we've probably taken this from $80,000 a year back 8 years ago, to the number that you're looking at today. And there are the downsides to it from just a statistical point of view. we can't collect the Medicare, and we don't try to collect. If Medicare pays, then it really is, as the chief said, deputy chief said, that it's about, 80% of what our usual and customary is, isn't it?
Right. So what you actually is, we have a higher billing rate, and Medicare has a set rate. So let's pretend our rate's 500, Medicare might be 400, and then Medicare's rule is 80%. So we don't see the full 400. And if somebody's on a fixed income or doesn't have, supplemental insurance, and it's people in our community and other places, we don't track them down for $50 or $80, and we think that's reasonable.
Well, not unlike a contracting healthcare provider that accepts the less reimbursement rate given that, and that's not uncommon. So we are a healthcare provider when we're doing what you're doing.
And there's some commercial billing insurance companies that wanted us to do that, and we investigated that, and we found that we would potentially lose because, like the Blue Choices, Blue Cross, other ones, we have consistently with our demographics, they have paid the amount. So we would hate to automatically lose an amount if we have the ability, the people are paying it.
Thank you, Deputy Chief. Councilor Dwyer, then Councilor Hines.
Also on that point, just so the council understands, that if we transport the patient, we bill. Whether we get the patient from inside our city or mutual aid somewhere, if we go to another town, take the patient, we bill for that service. So just so.
Thank you for the clarification. Councilor Dwyer, then Councilor
Yeah,
Hines.
Just to follow up, I appreciate that and the complexity of that. Obviously, what caught my eye was to ask whether it's a trend or not. It's just the drastic difference between one year and another, and we're not all aging that rapidly. And I can accept that maybe that was just a one-year blip, or I would expect that there would be a trend of this decreased proportion for the reasons that you said. But maybe this is a little exaggerated for whatever reason between one year and another.
Also for calendar year '06, we were reconciling our bills also,
Okay.
because since we started with Comstar, there had been some that were out there that have never been paid on, and they were multiple years old. And we worked with the finance department in the city pretty extensively with the auditors, and recognized there was some outlying monies that had never been collected over the many years, and we went back to see what we could collect or not, and there was a significant amount that we could not collect.
Sure.
So there might be a blip in it. I hope there's a blip in this year, and that we've remedied that.
Okay.
Thank you. I think I saw Councilor Hines.
Yes, I have a question that was asked of me once, and you may not have a ready answer, but does the quality and the ability of this fire department for the city of Portsmouth impact the insurance rates on property in this city?
Actually, yeah, your ability of your fire department, how many fire stations you have, the number of manned apparatus has a direct effect on your ISO rating, your Insurance Services Office rating. We did inquire, and I filled the city manager in on this. Right now, we're at a 4, which is fairly good. We tried to get closer to a 1. There are communities around the country, such as Los Angeles or Cambridge, Mass., that are Class 1 fire departments, and that literally means that you go from block to block and there's a fire station. We don't have the ability to do that. I think that we're as far as fire stations placement in the city and apparatus, we're doing well. One of the areas they looked at was staffing, but we were not. It's not fiscally possible for us to meet the requirements of ISO to go up to a 2 or a 1. That would require 2 more fully staffed ladder companies, 3 more stations. It was just
Right,
so.
and
We're at 4. It's a very good rating, and we've done everything we can to move.
10 or
I think it's 6.
In addition to that, it also would require us to do some things with the building department as well, inspections and things.
What is that?
And next I saw Councilor Reynolds, then Councilor Pentelakis.
Chief, could you go back in your slides to the couple of slides that talked about the prevention activities plan reviews and inspections and things like that, yeah. Certainly, we're all aware of the maxim about prevention versus cure, and so for that reason, I'm glad to see that in the budget request, you're including the fire funding for the fire inspector position. The position's been there, hasn't been funded in the past. I philosophically think that it's something that we ought to fund because of the investment return philosophy. But as I noted this slide and the next one, I couldn't help but wonder whether some services that are preventive services, like plans reviewed, perhaps environmental hazard assessments, or I don't know what the consultations are, whether we could or should seek ways to increase revenues. I know that we have permit fees and inspection fees and things like that, but I just wondered if you could comment on the extent to which doing things like plan review or hazard assessment or things, what comes to my mind is, well, shouldn't companies that are getting that done, pay consultants for a certification or something versus having it a sort of a publicly provided service?
Well,
or is it already covered in fees?
If you remember what I said about fees and taxes, we do, if you go to the revenue side of the budget, you'll see we, in the building department, collect a substantial amount of fees for building permits. As part of that building permit process, you have the electrical inspection, the plumbing inspection, you have the review by the building official and by the fire marshal. And, quite frankly, in most cities, the fire marshal has a very close relationship with the building department. The deputy chief is in the building department a lot, reviewing plans, meeting with building officials, and doing a lot of, his other work as well. But we are already charged for that. I mean, we could look at further charges, but I think if you look and see, we do have a substantial amount of money that we put in for building permits, and I don't know what that number is, Judy. I think it's probably about $700,000. I think the last time I looked at it, 700 and some odd thousand.
One of the things that we
So
did.
maybe, sorry, just.
But so we can take a look at it.
It's about 1% of the budget already. So, I recall.
I think it's around 700,000.
Fee committee a couple of years ago, and so I know that we do that. Came to my mind, so I thought I'd ask for a little bit of explanation.
It's about 700,000. So we can take a look
at
at
the budget, anyway.
The fee committee.
Before I cut in front of Councilor Penelakis and whoever else is next, Chief, do you have a comment that's responsive to that?
Yes, what we did do was, of course, just like any other department, if insurance companies are calling for reports, they get charged for that. If they call for the hazard assessment for their property, they get charged a higher amount that we put through fees process last year to try to recoup some money for that time.
Okay, thanks. Good to know.
Thank you, Chief. Further questions? I guess Councilor Penelakis.
Yeah, Chief, can you tell me how many places within the city of Portsmouth have to be inspected for licenses for the state, that they need your inspection in order to get their license, such as a liquor license, and elderly housing, I think, has to have it. And do you have an idea how many places there is?
I'd let Deputy Griswold from Fire Prevention.
Actually, I don't have a good number. There's a lot of places that get inspected by the state and by me because
I mean you have to inspect
right,
them.
That I have to sign off so the state will grant permits, and they include daycare, kindergartens, home health care, all the places of assembly. There's a lot of places that all the places of assembly that actually sell liquor. I don't inspect like gas stations or places like that or convenience stores, although I should, but I don't because it's just not, there isn't time.
But if you don't do that on some of them places, their licenses are held up, right?
That's correct. They are not, if my place of assembly permit has expired, which is, they're good for a year, and lots of times it takes me 2 years or longer to get back to some place. But if the Liquor Commission comes down in the meantime and says your place of assembly permit is expired, I get very, very upset phone calls from the property owners and saying, you got to come out right away, I'm going to lose my liquor license. So, yeah, I do, we spend a lot of time out there doing that.
I'd like to agree with Councilor Reynolds. We do need this extra person, because if you do not, the state survives on fees and licenses, and if they don't get a license, don't get the proper paperwork, they like to fine the people for the paperwork too. So I just hope the Portsmouth's able to keep up with them.
Councilor Smith, then Councilor Whitehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was just, one thing when I read the budget before and going back over it, and just one comment to the chief, that in this budget, this is the first budget that I've actually looked at, that your operating expenses are lower from last year to this year. I want to commend you for that. I understand personnel that's a contractual obligation to them, but your training costs, you have those down in line. Your utilities, of course, have to go up a little bit, but the policies that you have in place in keeping a close watch on the dollars, I thank you for that, because to go from 300, and it's not much, but it's still a number, 347,000, and actually decreasing it to $345,000. I just wanted to thank you for that good work. And
We have tried to, well, thank you, Counselor. We have tried to, in this budget, and actually all of our budgets, try to present the City Council the real numbers. As I said, this budget that's presented to you funds all 61 approved positions in the fire department. Should there be large-scale reductions in the budget, it comes off of staffing. As I said, this budget maintains 13 firefighters during the day, 14 firefighters at night, and we do that to the best of our abilities. As you know, that's one of the first things that we look at when we're trying to make sure that we come in at the dollars that are allotted. But we've tried to put together a real budget for you.
Thank you, Chief. Councilor Whitehouse.
Chief, in reference to equipment, your new pumper, your new aerial ladder, as the city grows and heights becomes an issue, these new hotels, these new structures, what we have as rolling stock now, are you able to make a roof rescue or fight a fire from the roof down at 50, 60 feet in height with the outriggers and away from the building?
Yeah, we have worked very hard with the city manager, the fire commission, and improving the rolling stock that the department has. And we are now equipped with two aerial devices, one 75 foot and one 109 feet. And one in the next upcoming year, the large aerial device is set to be replaced. So yeah, we've kept up with it. You also have to remember that on the larger buildings, the code review process is even more important, because as you find as the buildings get bigger, as the people inside the building grows, that the code requirements for sprinkler systems and fire alarm systems are more stringent. So it's a balance. We still need to have the equipment to get there and to do the job, but just remember all those hotels and those big places, they have the sprinklers and the detectors in every room and the standpipes and the stairwells and the master boxes and that type of stuff.
So you're a member of the TAC committee and you make that presentation and the final decision?
Well, we've arranged it so the person that sits on the TAC committee is the same person reviewing the plans, Deputy Griswold. So we've kept that communication straight.
Okay, thanks, Chief.
Councilor Dwyer.
I know you want a whole fire prevention officer. Is there any practice, or would there make any sense to do some additional contracted services if a whole person isn't affordable? Or have you done that in the past or thought about that to increase the number of inspections you'd like to do, even if we don't get a whole additional position? Is that a feasible thing? Is that done?
To contract it out, I guess is.
Or to purchase some additional services, even if a whole position isn't added. Is that a possibility?
Well, thank you for the question. Anything's possible. I will say this, that when it comes to especially the Downtown Business Association, the business owners in the city, when they call with a question or it's inspection time, not only is it highly technical and requires an educated, friendly person to do it, But the business owners like to see that face. They like to know, they like to have a relationship with that person. Deputy Griswold's done a tremendous job with that. Charlie Jones, when he was here, you could ask any business owner in the city who George Pierce or Charlie Jones were, and they could tell you. And that relationship is important. So I don't know who would contract the services with, but I don't know if that would work.
Okay.
Further questions for the chief, deputy, assistant chief? Council Reynolds.
One more question. Chief, can you describe, just say a little bit about the, because it's one of the pieces in the capital plan this year, the heavy rescue unit, and what kind of capabilities that'll give us and why we need to make that investment?
Certainly. The department has always had a rescue truck, and this latest one that we have now, and I'm sure the firefighters can correct me if I'm wrong, was won by the personnel at a raffle. So it cost one of the trade shows, it cost the department no dollars to do that. That was in 1988. The vehicle is certainly showing its age, and it carries all the equipment for mass casualty incidents. It carries air supply for long-duration firefighting activities, so they can fill their bottles at the truck, and all of the all the equipment that we would need at a large incident, but we don't use every day. What we have done was taken in the capital was to reduce our fleet by one vehicle, basically buying one vehicle and replacing two, that was not only capable of having a small pump and a tank on it to protect itself in an incident, but it would have all of the technical rescue equipment on it. We're seeing more technical rescues, more industrial accidents as our facilities change, more high-speed, serious motor vehicle accidents in our transportation sector. This vehicle will carry all that equipment. Basically, it's a huge rolling toolbox that has the jaws of life on it, for a lack of a better term, the rams for lifting things, the airbags, all the specialty rescue stuff on that vehicle. So basically, we're just replacing the rescue truck, but we're economizing by replacing two vehicles.
Thank you. Very helpful.
Does anyone else from the council have any questions for anyone here? Okay, at this time, I would like to first thank the chief, the deputy, the assistant chief, the fire commissioners for being present. We thank you for the hard work you do on behalf of the community, and we thank you for the good job that you do. At this point in time, I'd remind fellow councilors we have another meeting at 6:30 on Friday.
Thursday.
I'm sorry, Thursday. What am I, Friday? Will be a revolt. Thursday at 6:30 with the school department. I should also once again remind you that on May 15th, when we have the final budget work session, we would certainly invite the fire department and commissioners to be there should we have questions, when we may ask additional questions if this has provoked further thought and analysis. So with that, unless any councilor or anyone else has anything further, I would seek a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.